Major support for these programs is provided by Bank of America Merrill Lynch and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, M&T Bank, Chase Commercial Term Lending. Additional support is provided by AVR Realty Company, LLC, Bingham McCutcheon, LLP, Briarwood Organization, Bruce Mosler, Capital One Bank, Cassidy Turley, C.B. Richard Ellis, Chelsea Lighting, Cushman and Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, DDG Partners, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Friedman LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova Burns and Gian Tomasi, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Corman Communities, Madison Realty Capital, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Site Comply, Sterling and Sterling, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, the Wickoff Group, Urban American, and Ackman Ziff Real Estate, Ariel Property Advisors, Eastern Consolidated, Essex Capital Partners, Goldman Properties, Moynihan Group, Muss Development, RAL Development Services, the Spandrel Group, LLC, Rosewood Realty Group, Triangle Equities.
So there are kids who are born in Brooklyn, New York, who then go to New Jersey, who then go to Johns Hopkins and become involved with the Sports Authority, development. I have one of those guys today. I'm very lucky to have Carl Goldberg, who's the managing partner and one of the three principals of Roseland Development. Thanks for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So, as I was saying, you were born in Brooklyn. Your parents lived in Brooklyn. What happened?
They lived in Brooklyn, but we emigrated. I guess the proper word is emigrated to New Jersey at an early age.
Now, you said during the war, your dad was involved. He was in the Pacific, right?
He fought in the Pacific Theater, and he was actually involved in most of the famous battles in the Pacific Theater, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Midway. There wasn't an Air Force at that time. He was in the Army Air Force Photo Reconnaissance Group.
So he comes back, you're born here, and he worked in a factory.
Yeah, he worked in a factory in Newark.
And so then you and the family moved to Newark, and then you moved where?
I grew up, most of my childhood was spent in West Orange.
Now growing up, you said to me, growing up as a kid, you worked like in a camp once in a while, right?
Yeah, I worked in a camp that was sponsored by the Newark Boys Club, which was a fascinating place. It was a facility that focused on Fresh Air Fund campers. It gave me a very interesting perspective on a wide range of issues. Most of the campers came from Newark. They had never been out in the great outdoors. One of the years I was the swimming counselor, and I was giving swimming lessons, and I was amazed at how many of the campers had no idea how to swim, and that was a process that started from scratch.
Now, growing up, you told me somebody who was influential. I mean, here's a kid who lives in New Jersey, really didn't leave that section of town, and subsequently one of your teachers spoke to you about the famous Johns Hopkins. How'd that happen?
Well, my French teacher in high school had a younger brother who attended Johns Hopkins, and came to me one day after school, and I hadn't really given much thought as to where I would go to college, and I actually wasn't even 100% certain that I would in fact go to college. And she said to me, "You really need to look into Johns Hopkins," and I did so. And I remember my father bought me my first suit, It was actually a three-piece suit.
And you took the train.
Yeah, he sent me on the train, and I went down to Johns Hopkins University. I walked around the campus, and I had an interview. I fell in love with the place, and shortly thereafter, I received a letter that I was accepted, and I ended up matriculating there from 1968 through 72.
And what were you doing at Hopkins? What were you majoring in?
I was majoring in chemistry, which really doesn't have a great deal to do with real estate. So it's funny how your education, other than maybe providing with you for you a way of how to organize your thoughts, doesn't really necessarily form a bedrock for what you do.
And during the summers, what were you doing when you were at Hopkins?
I was actually working. I worked 1 year at Shearing Pharmaceuticals, and I worked 1 year at Allied Chemical.
So you were planning to be a chemist.
I was absolutely planning
you were going to be
chemistry.
a chemist. So you graduated, and you told me an interesting thing. You had a great uncle who was a furrier,
Yeah.
and you got the scholarship from him, from the Furrier Association?
Yeah, and
what was this?
He had been a furrier his entire career. He had been unmarried, didn't have any children, and when I graduated from college, he was hugely pleased. And there was a program through the Furriers Union, and I was able to access some money, and
$1,000, right?
$1,000, and I parlayed that into an 18-month trip to Europe.
So tell me about that 18-month. I mean, you music teacher, waiter. What did you do during?
Well, you have to pick up odd jobs in order, because
right, the $1,000 was going to go quick.
Right, $1,000 went quickly. Although $1,000 in 1972 was a lot different than it is today.
So where'd you end up? Where were you?
I think I traveled to almost 35 different countries.
Those Euro passes.
Those second class Euro pass. And it was a fascinating experience for me, because it taught me a little bit about how to live independently, how to think on your own 2 feet, and how to find a job.
So you come back, it's when, 73 or
73, the fall of 1973.
And what happens? I mean, the chemist,
Right.
the chemist from Newark, okay? So what happens?
Well, I took a job at Allied Chemical for several years, found out that I wasn't really inclined for the corporate life.
Now, but while you were there, when did you get married?
I got married in 1976.
And and your father-in-law was an investor in some property in East Orange?
Yeah, he had a couple of partners, and they would invest in small apartment buildings in East Orange, West Orange, some of the suburbs of Newark. And he came to me maybe one day after Sunday evening dinner and said, you should really think about real estate as a career for yourself. You can go to Morris County Community College, and you can get your real estate sales associate's license. And that's what I did. And that propelled me into the real estate industry.
Yeah, but let's talk. So you're working still at Allied Chemical.
Correct.
And nights and weekends you were a part-time
selling
realist.
homes. I was selling homes. I was selling
Goldberg, selling homes,
I was selling homes, and I worked for a new home builder, Murray Pantier.
No, we'll get to that in a second. But you were selling homes.
Yes.
And one time you're selling a home, one of it to Murray Pantier, and there's a commission. That's really that
is.
Right. So let's get to that story, because it's really an interesting story.
He had indicated to me that if I wanted to move along the real estate industry, I should try to find him a parcel of land. And in that time, in Morris County, there were still a lot of farmers and operating farms. And I found a farmer in Florent Park who was interested in selling his land. And Mr. Pantier came to visit the property, loved it, and paid $450,000 for 11 building lots.
Now, did he get them zoned, or?
I actually helped him get them zoned and approved.
Which was a good training ground.
It was a great training program for me.
And this was a $25,000 commission, right?
$25,000 commission, which
50% went to the shop,
right,
to the company, and 50% would have come to you.
Correct.
And you're making, at that time, working for Allied Chemical, about $12,000 a year.
Right, so it was a full year's salary.
And what happens? You say to your
He said to me, you know what? You really don't need that commission. You should really consider investing that commission and becoming partners with my son. You can build the community. His son Larry and I could build the project, 11 single-family homes, and I could take that $12,000, invest it back into the community.
have a little piece of equity.
And have a little piece of equity.
What Mrs. Goldberg say?
Mrs. Goldberg was taken aback, to say the least, because she was counting on that for a down payment on our first home that we were hoping to purchase. And I got her to reluctantly buy into the prospect of me changing careers, becoming a construction superintendent.
So the guy who goes to Johns Hopkins with a chemistry degree, who's with Allied Chemical, now becomes a project manager. On an 11-unit development. Now, something which I think is important about Murray and a number of these Holocaust survivors, Murray was one of the Schindlers, right?
He was, yes. He was one of Schindler's children, and as a matter of fact, if you look at the credits on Schindler's List, he was one of the technical advisors to Steven Spielberg on the film.
So what year is this that you...
This is 1977. And we begin construction on 11 single-family homes in Florham Park, and the project is successful.
But let's talk about that project, because there's a great story that you told me. Now, part of your job, you were getting paid.
Correct.
You know, you had a salary and you had a cut of the deal, but part of the job was Murray wanted you to learn the business. He
Correct.
wanted you and Larry to, Boychik, wasn't it the real comment he said to you, Boychik, leave that business and come to work with me, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, Boychik, come join me. But he said, Boychik, I'm going to teach you this business. And I think it's the story with the mason, which is a great story. The checkbook was in the trunk of the car. Tell me the story.
Well, in those days, when you were going to pay the contractors got paid by the piece. So the roofer got paid for a certain number of square feet of roofing he would put down, and the mason would get paid per block, and Murray would come with his son Larry on the job on a Friday, and we would have invoices from the contractors, and they were all by the piece. And I remember the first payroll shortly after I had started the job, and the foundation was going in the first house, and I presented Mr. Pantier with an invoice for 850 block that were laid on the first foundation, and I proudly gave it to him for payment. And he looked at me and he said, did you actually count the block? And I had to admit that I had not. And he handed me back the invoice and he said, you'll have to go tell the mason that he's going to have to wait for his check until next week, because you're going to have to go down on the foundation tomorrow morning and actually verify that there were 850 block laid. And it taught me a very valuable lesson, and one that stayed with me throughout my career, and that is you really have to get into the details of your business, and you have to be able to verify the things that are taking place on your job sites, because otherwise they unwind, get out of control, and you don't really understand what's taking place.
So from that, you and Larry created what, Bertram?
Bertram Associates, and there were a group of partners that were involved in Bertram Associates, and Bertram Associates became a very successful home builder throughout the 1980s, built many of the most prominent projects in northern New Jersey, did some of the first common interest entity communities, townhome communities that had homeowners associations, and it was a very successful entity through the 1980s.
And you got involved with the homeowners, the Home Builders Society?
I did get involved with the Home Builders Association. I got very active with them in the middle 1980s and became a member of the board of directors of the Home Builders Association later in the 1980s, and eventually went on their ladder to become an officer.
Which was interesting because you met a guy when you were at the Home Builders Association who subsequently became your partner, right?
I did. I met Marshall Teicher through some of the activities at the Home Builders Association. I was working on some regulatory work, and Marshall had come to New Jersey as a partner with Lincoln Property Company, and by this time, real estate had softened into the 1989-1990 real estate recession, and we began to look at acquiring portfolios of non-performing debt.
With a third party.
With a third partner, Bradford Klatt. And in 1992, we formed Roseland Property
Now,
Company.
Brad was from the securities business.
He was from the
He was a Wall Street.
He was a Wall Street guy. He had worked at Goldman Sachs, and he was at Daiwa Securities when I met him in 1992.
So what were the three of you going to do at that time?
Well, at that time, we were going to work with some of these Wall Street firms to acquire some of the larger portfolios of non-performing debt that were entering the market in the early 1990s. And we were going to try to resolve some of the underlying real estate issues and recycle those assets back into the market, hopefully as the market started to improve through the 1990s.
And since the state of New Jersey happened to have a substantial number of non-performing assets,
quite a bit.
With, there were savings banks like Crosslands and City Federal and
Federal and National Westminster Bank was one of the prominent.
Right. So you had all of these, and then you also had a hedge fund who was backing you.
We had hedge funds that were backing us. A company called Farallon from California provided some of the equity for us to acquire.
But I think one of the major, developments, which you're still even working on today, is this transaction, because it has so many, the Weehawken in West New York. Tell me about that.
Well, in 1995, Crossland Savings Bank decided to sell the non-performing note and mortgage that secured 200 acres of land along the Hudson River waterfront, folding over into three municipalities, Weehawken, West New York, and Guttenberg. And we acquired that note and mortgage in 1995 and took a deed in lieu of foreclosure from the borrower and acquired title to that land, which is now Port Imperial.
Now, one of the interesting things was, I think, one of the developments of Port Imperial at that time, there was the Arthur's Landing.
Correct.
There was the ferry.
The ferry had just started in 1986.
Right. So you had the ferry, you had Arthur's Landing, the restaurant, you had some other things. And you go to see this newly installed mayor of West New York, Sears?
Albio Sears.
Albio Sears. And you said to me, it's a great story. You're going in there and telling Albio that you're going to build a townhouse development, and you're hopefully going to get like $175,000 for a townhouse. Now, Albio is what, 6'5", 6'6"?
Albio was 6'5". He was a famous basketball player, had played for St. Peter's College, and he was the newly installed mayor, and I had this wonderful conversation with him. And when I told him that we had hoped to sell townhomes down at the riverfront for $175,000, he literally fell off his chair laughing. I mean, literally. And he looked at me and he goes, I've heard some good things about you, and people told me that you're pretty intelligent and a good business person, but I must share with you the likelihood of you ever selling homes at that price point. In
West New York, as I think either you said to me or did my research, was one of the lowest income categories of any town.
Yeah, it was. It had the third lowest median income of any municipality in the state of New Jersey in the middle 1990s, and the West New York waterfront was their most valuable resource.
So what happens over there?
Well, we began to build our first apartment community, and we began to build a townhome community concurrently. And in 1997, we opened up those townhomes for sale in what was becoming an increasingly hotter market. And we sold the first 25 condominiums in 2 weekends at a median price point of $350,000.
Double what you expected to sell at the beginning.
Correct. And that was really the start of the resurgence of that portion of the Hudson River waterfront. The views are spectacular, and the adjacency to mass transportation was just evolving, and people were finding a whole new lifestyle opportunity to come back to the waterfront and commute to their jobs in Manhattan via some of the mass transportation opportunities, especially the ferry.
So how many, since the initial development, how much has been built on that
Nearly 2,800 homes.
2,800 homes? Now, you and your partners have built all over the state, but you also did a lot of work in the Woodbridge area?
We actually, New Brunswick.
New Brunswick, I meant.
We did a lot of work in New Brunswick. We built a community there called the Highlands at Plaza Square, 417 apartments, which at the time was the biggest apartment community yet built in New Brunswick. And New Brunswick was a real success story at that point in time. It really began almost a template for that kind of urban infill redevelopment.
What do you mean by that?
Well, New Brunswick understood very early on how the public sector works with the private sector to create the kinds of areas in
Right.
need of redevelopment that
Because
allow.
New Brunswick was always J&J country.
It was always J&J
J&J country, and you had the medical center, and you had a variety of
Right.
things. But there was, your redevelopment was a major redevelopment of the town.
Correct.
With Rutgers and everything else.
And they have a not-for-profit entity there called DevCo, New Brunswick Housing Development Company, who has really created the kind of public-private partnerships that spur that kind of urban infill redevelopment. And that became a model, I think, for other communities in the state of New Jersey.
Now, and other programs that you've been involved with even today, I mean, is Jersey City.
Jersey City.
Over the years, you've seen the change of Jersey City.
Yeah, I was speaking with Mayor Healy at a seminar a couple of days ago, and we were talking about what's transpired in Jersey City in the last 20 years. And I think Jersey City has enjoyed the benefits of redevelopment in its urban core more than any other municipality on the Eastern Seaboard. It's amazing, the transformation in Jersey City. There's been probably 7,000 or 8,000 very high quality residential units. It's been done in a mixed use way, so there's adjacent retail, office, the growth of the Exchange Plaza office component, and so people can live, work, and play near their homes in Jersey City.
They allowed you to come to New York. I mean, you got involved with the Milsteins and you did work in Battery Park City.
Well, the Milsteins were early investors in Roseland Property Company, and we've always enjoyed a wonderful relationship with Howard and Edward Milstein, and they've been big advocates of what we've done. And we recently, in 2011, finished two major buildings with them in Battery Park City, Liberty Lux and Liberty Green.
And you had done something earlier with them.
We had done something earlier with them as well.
Now, you know, the kid from New Jersey got involved with politics, you know. Tell me a little bit about that. And then I think one of the crowning achievements that we have to talk about is your 10-year stint with the Sports and Exposition.
Being active in Hudson County, you really had to understand the political backdrop, because land use is really the most important tool for any municipality. That's what determines what their future rateable base will be. And so you have to be able to have an appropriate and productive dialogue with elected officials in order to understand what the needs of the municipality are and what you can do that has economic viability. And so I got involved in politics in the middle 1990s in Hudson County, became very close to then Congressman Robert Menendez, who's now the U.S. Senator from New Jersey, who was a huge proponent of mass transportation along the Hudson River waterfront, and genuinely understood how mass transportation and creating that adjacency will bring back people to the urban centers. And so politics becomes an integral part of your life when you're in the development business, not only in New Jersey, but I think in other geography as well.
So it's what, 2001, you're in Atlantic City and there's a new governor in town.
Right.
What happens?
Well,
He's sitting with you and he said, what?
I had worked on Governor or candidate McGreevy's campaign in 2001, and he was elected governor in November of 2001, and he invited me to come have lunch with him later in November down at the League of Municipality Convention in Atlantic City, and we were at lunch, and he said to me, I think what you need to do in this new administration, and I said, well, I'm really not looking to go into government. He said, yes, but there's a perfect position for you which allows you to keep your regular job, but with an opportunity for public service. And he asked me if I would accept the position of chairman of the New Jersey Sports and Exposition Authority.
Which was running the Meadowlands,
Yeah, it runs
the racetrack, the arena, Monmouth
stadium.
Park,
Yeah.
stadium, Atlantic City.
Atlantic City Convention Center, Boardwalk Hall. At that point in time, the Sports and Exposition Authority had almost $1.6 billion a year in gross receipts and ran almost all the important sporting and entertainment events in the state.
But I'd say, as you and I discussed, the two crowning major things that you accomplished during your period as the chairman over there was Giant Jet Stadium,
Correct.
Or MetLife Stadium,
Right.
right, and also the bringing the train out there. Because
Yeah, there had never been mass transportation in to the Meadowlands, and now through the partnership that the Sports Authority enjoyed with the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, we were able to bring the first rail link that connected Penn Station to the Meadowlands in a 23-minute ride. And it was great for the sports complex, and it also became a catalyst for the desire to build a new facility to make sure that both the Jets and Giants stayed and played in the state of New Jersey for the foreseeable future. And they are both now going to be there for 40 years at a minimum.
They have a 40-year lease.
Correct.
Now, they built the stadium.
They built the stadium with their own money on land that's subject to a ground lease from the state of New Jersey. They spent $1.6 billion in private capital to build that facility. And during my time at the sports complex, which was in excess of 9 years, I worked for 4 different governors. And it was Governor Cody's dream when he took over from McGreevey in 2004 to build this new facility in the Meadowlands as he thought part of his legacy for his tenure as governor.
With 1 minute left, let's talk. You've been very involved with Johns Hopkins. Tell me a little bit. You're married, and you have.
I'm married. I have 2 daughters, the older of which went to Johns Hopkins, and she works with me at Roseland Property Company now. She's our Director of Government Affairs. And I have a younger daughter who's in the midst of her medical education in Boston. I'm still very involved in Johns Hopkins, and my daughter and I recently were involved with the historic renovation of the single most important building on campus, Gilman Hall, and we had the honor and privilege to have a wing of the building named after my mother, who passed away in 2002.
So, for the kid who was going to be a chemist, let's put it this way. For the kid who didn't know if he was going to go to college, who then became a chemist, who then took a trip for about 1.5 years on the Fourier Scholarship, and you've done a lot. And
I appreciate you saying that. It's been an interesting career, and I hope that it will go on productively for many years to come.
And thanks for being here today.
It's my pleasure.